It started with tire marks, long and deep, cutting straight across the gravel at the edge of my driveway and bleeding into the border of my front garden like a slow-motion wound. I had spent the weekend before carefully planting a row of lavender bushes along the edge, hoping to make the entrance to my home a little more welcoming. But when I stepped outside that Monday morning, coffee in hand, all I saw were crushed stalks and chunks of soil where flowers used to be. My stomach sank, but only for a moment because I already knew who did it. Karen, our HOA president. The woman who seemed to think her personal SUV was the royal carriage and every inch of the neighborhood, including my property, was her kingdom to rule and roam. It wasn't the first time either. For months, she'd been using my driveway as her personal turnaround zone, even parking there occasionally when she got into arguments with her husband and stormed off. At first, I thought it was a fluke. I gave her the benefit of the doubt. But as the weeks turned into months, her little detours became routine. It was like she went out of her way to run her tires through my garden bed. Sometimes I'd catch her in the act, windows down, smirking as she revved her engine and veered across the edge of my lawn like it was some kind of personal joke. When I confronted her about it, she responded with the same polished condescension she used at every HOA meeting. "You know, sweetie," she had said, adjusting her giant sunglasses and flashing a fake smile, "the driveway kind of overlaps with the community path. Technically, I'm within my rights." I wasn't sure what fantasy world she was living in, but I pulled out the plat map that very afternoon. My driveway, my property, my problem. The HOA bylaws were clear about common space, and my driveway was not one of them. But the problem with Karen wasn't just her entitlement. It was that she was the HOA, or at least she acted like she was. Every time I reported her to the board, nothing happened. "We'll look into it," they said. Or, "Karen's been here a long time. Maybe try to be neighborly." Neighborly? Was it neighborly to tear up someone's plants? Was it neighborly to drive on private property without permission and leave behind cracked stonework and ruts in the dirt like a tractor gone rogue? I didn't think so. Still, I held back. I documented it. Took photos, compiled timestamps. I even installed a basic trail cam at the end of the driveway which captured multiple recordings of Karen either cutting through or outright stopping her car in front of my garage while she took phone calls. But the HOA didn't care. They were spineless. And Karen knew it. She got bold too. I started noticing that her visits to my driveway always followed something like a rejected proposal at the HOA meeting or the time I questioned her $75 ornamental shrubbery replacement fee. That one especially sent her into a passive-aggressive frenzy. For 3 days straight, she parked her car nose-to-nose with mine while I was gone at work, blocking my driveway until my neighbor had to knock and tell me my own parking space had been hijacked again. And the cherry on top? Karen would always leave with a smile and a wave like nothing happened. That's when I realized this wasn't just about convenience for her. This was power. This was dominance. She was marking her territory, quite literally, on my land. I tried putting up small deterrents, cone barriers, reflector stakes, but she either ignored them or kicked them over. One time I returned from a weekend trip to find her SUV parked in my driveway with the engine still warm. She wasn't even home. She had left her car there while she went for a ride with one of her HOA buddies. When I called her, she laughed. "Well, it wasn't blocking anything, was it? You weren't even home." It was surreal. I kept asking myself, what kind of person goes out of their way to be this insufferable? And then it hit me, the kind of person who's never been told no. The kind of person who's always had control. The kind of person who needed to lose badly. But I wasn't ready for revenge. Not yet. I needed to understand the full scope of the situation. So I did something Karen didn't expect. I stayed quiet and observed. Every time she pulled in, I noted the time. Every time she trampled part of the garden, I photographed it. I installed another camera, better angle, wider lens. And then I checked with the city. Turns out, the portion of my property she kept crossing wasn't just mine on paper, it was also protected under local land use regulations, especially the part that edged into the flower bed, which was now registered as a low-maintenance pollinator strip. That's right. My lavender bed was legally protected. I laughed when I found that out. Karen had been joyriding across a registered environmental buffer zone. I waited. I let it happen again. More photos. More documentation. Then came the final straw. She pulled in one afternoon while I was sitting on the porch and did a full K-turn on my lawn. Left a giant tire rut across the newly spread mulch and flicked a cigarette out the window when she left. My hands shook. I didn't yell. I just stood there, watched her go, and realized something important. This woman didn't think there would ever be consequences. And maybe up until now she was right. But I was done playing nice. I made a plan. And it started with one thing Karen couldn't get around: steel. The gate wasn't just a gate. It was a line in the sand. A final declaration that said, "This is mine. Cross it again and you'll regret it." After months of watching Karen treat my driveway like her personal roundabout and ignore every polite request to stop, I decided it was time for something less polite and a little more permanent. So I built it. A 7-foot-tall, powder-coated, jet black, steel gate with a keypad entry and thick concrete footings sunk deep into the earth. The kind of gate you see at the entrance to private estates or secret compounds, not suburban homes. I didn't care. If Karen wanted to play queen of the cul-de-sac, then I was building a castle and it needed a drawbridge. It took a week to install. During that time, I made a point to be outside, supervising every step of the process. And every day, like clockwork, Karen would drive by slowly, windows down, staring like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. On the third day, she actually stopped in the middle of the road, got out of her SUV in her president of the HOA windbreaker, and came stomping across my lawn like she had been summoned to lay down the law. "Excuse me," she said, voice tight with condescension, "but what exactly is going on here?" I looked up from the blueprints and gave her the same fake smile she'd given me for months. "Installing a security gate," I replied. "I figured it was time I made it clear where the public road ends and my private property begins." She blinked, thrown off by the calmness in my voice. "You can't just build a gate. That's not in compliance with the neighborhood's aesthetic standards." I gestured to the black iron rising majestically from the posts. "Actually, it is. It's compliant with every single city code. I even submitted a courtesy notice to the building inspector. Want to see the permit?" She bristled. "Well, it wasn't approved by the HOA board." "Didn't need to be," I said. "Because unlike the community pool, my driveway isn't part of your kingdom." The way her jaw clenched made my week. She stood there for another moment, hands twitching like she wanted to yank the post out of the ground with her bare hands. Then she muttered something about calling an emergency meeting and stormed off, stomping back to her SUV with all the grace of a rejected soap opera villain. By the end of the week, the gate was finished. It was glorious. It glided open with a smooth motorized hum controlled via keypad or remote from inside the house. I even had a little sign installed next to it: "Private property. No HOA access beyond this point." That same day, Karen came back, this time flanked by two of her loyal lapdogs from the board, Daryl and Meg, both of whom looked uncomfortable from the moment they stepped foot on my property. Karen, however, was in full dictator mode. "This is unacceptable," she said, waving a folder of printed bylaws. "You are disrupting the accessibility of community pathways. This gate is a violation of the HOA's easement rights." I didn't even pretend to be polite. "There is no easement," I said flatly. "I've checked. There's no legal document granting the HOA or its members access to my driveway. If you think otherwise, feel free to take it up with a judge." Karen's face turned the color of a ripe tomato. She flipped through her folder, probably hoping a magical page would appear to back her up. It didn't. Daryl cleared his throat. "Karen, maybe we should, revisit the documentation." "No," she snapped. "He's setting a dangerous precedent. What if everyone starts fencing off their driveways?" "You mean what if everyone starts defending their private property?" I asked, deadpan. She ignored me. "You're going to give us the gate code," she said suddenly. "What?" "The HOA requires open access for emergency scenarios. We need the code in case a community member needs to use the driveway." I couldn't help but laugh. "That's not how any of this works. No one needs to use my driveway except me. You're not getting the code." Her eyes narrowed. "So you're refusing to cooperate with the HOA? Karen, if you want to drive through a gate, I suggest you go to a theme park." She left in a rage, barking orders at her bored cronies and muttering something about insubordination. That night, I caught her outside again, standing at the gate with a flashlight, tapping on the keypad like she could guess the code through sheer rage. I turned on the floodlight and leaned out my window. "Wrong again, Karen." She flipped me off and stormed off into the darkness. But that wasn't the end of it. Over the next few days, I received 3 official HOA notices, all printed on letterhead with Karen's signature and that ridiculous golden logo she had designed herself. Each one was more desperate than the last. The first accused me of impeding neighborhood flow. The second cited community cohesion disruption. The third was my favorite. It accused me of gate-related aggression. I filed them away under trash. Then came the social media posts. Karen began flooding the neighborhood Facebook page with thinly veiled rants. "What kind of neighbor builds a wall?" she wrote, followed by a thread of complaints about how we were losing our sense of unity. People began commenting. Some agreed with her, but most didn't. A few even defended me outright. It's his driveway. Let him protect it. Maybe if you weren't always in his yard, this wouldn't be necessary. Karen tried to clap back, but the damage was done. People were talking. Her grip was slipping. And I hadn't even started yet. Things escalated when I caught her trying to tailgate behind the Amazon guy through the gate. She got halfway in before the sensor caught her and the gate stopped. She had to awkwardly back out while I watched from the porch, sipping lemonade like it was opening night of a Broadway show. Then she did the unthinkable. She called the cops. I was watching TV when the doorbell rang, and there they were, 2 officers looking mildly embarrassed. "Hi sir," one of them said, "we received a call about a barricade blocking access to a public area." I nearly laughed in their faces. Instead, I invited them in, showed them the property line documents, the city permit, and even the footage of Karen trying to sneak in. They nodded, thanked me, and left. But before they did, one of them asked, "That lady's with your HOA?" "Unfortunately," I said. "Makes sense," he replied. That night, Karen went full meltdown. She left a voicemail, yes, an actual voicemail screeching about how gates promote division and how I was ruining the neighborhood spirit. I saved it. I figured I'd need it later. The next day, she started a petition. She went door to door trying to get people to sign a demand for the gate's removal. But people were tired. Tired of her rules. Tired of the noise. Tired of the power trips. Most politely declined. Some slammed the door in her face. One neighbor even called me to laugh about how Karen stood on their porch sobbing about how she couldn't turn around anymore. And then came the moment that made every bit of this worth it. 3 a.m. My phone buzzed. I opened the security app and saw her. Karen, in pajamas, pacing in front of the gate. Her car sat awkwardly on the curb. She was yelling into her phone, 911, as it turned out, saying she couldn't access her usual parking area and was being unlawfully confined. Minutes later, blue lights lit up the street. I watched through the window as she launched into a full Karen monologue. The officers stood stone-faced. They asked for proof of ownership. She pointed at the gate. They asked for documentation. She couldn't provide any. I walked out, handed them the property deed, and didn't say a word. Karen kept shouting. One of the officers told her to calm down. She didn't. The other officer said, "Ma'am, this is your final warning." Karen took that as a cue to escalate. She screamed, "He's holding the neighborhood hostage." That's when they cuffed her. Right there, in front of the gate she tried to conquer. I watched, silent, as they read her rights and loaded her into the squad car. Her eyes met mine. I smiled. The gate swung closed behind them with a soft electric hum. You would think that after being handcuffed at 3 in the morning and hauled off in a police cruiser in front of half the neighborhood, a normal person would lay low for a while, maybe even issue an apology, reflect, regroup. Anything remotely resembling humility. But this was Karen. And Karen didn't know how to back down. If anything, her midnight arrest only made her double down with a vengeance I hadn't even thought possible. 2 days later, she emerged from her house like a wounded villain in a soap opera, sunglasses on, lips tight, flanked by 2 of her most devoted board members like bodyguards. She strutted around the neighborhood like she hadn't just had a full-on breakdown in front of uniformed officers. Instead, she spun it. I was unlawfully detained, she told anyone who would listen, which included the mail carrier, a group of kids on scooters, and a bewildered UPS guy. It was all a misunderstanding. I was concerned for the community. I was checking on a neighbor. "I'm the president of the HOA, for God's sake." She said that last line like it was supposed to mean something, like it gave her diplomatic immunity or royal status. Meanwhile, I was sitting comfortably behind my gate, sipping coffee like I was watching a reality show unfold. The calls started next. First, it was an officer I'd already met calling to inform me that Karen had submitted a formal complaint accusing me of harassment. Apparently, locking my own gate at night and refusing to give her the code now qualified as criminal intimidation. The officer sounded exhausted. "Look, sir," he said, "we're required to document it, but this is reaching into ridiculous territory." "You don't say," I replied. Then Karen filed another report, this time claiming the gate was obstructing emergency access routes. The fire department actually sent a guy to do a wellness inspection on my driveway. He showed up in uniform, clipboard in hand, polite but clearly annoyed. "Just doing my job," he said with a sigh. He looked at the gate, checked the clearance, took photos, and even timed the automatic opening speed. Afterward, he shook my hand and said, "You're fine." Honestly, this is one of the better installs I've seen. Karen must have been watching from her front window because not 30 minutes later, I heard a loud screech as her SUV peeled out of her driveway and tore down the street like she was running from her own ego. The next time I saw her was at the HOA meeting, which she insisted on holding in person rather than over Zoom. To keep things transparent, she said. What she really meant was that she wanted to deliver her vendetta face-to-face. The clubhouse was packed. The usual suspects filled the folding chairs, but this time they weren't as docile. Word had spread. People had seen the arrest, heard the yelling, read the Facebook posts. Karen stood at the front, her signature binder in hand, and launched into a speech that was less about community harmony and more like a trial where I was the defendant. We are facing a serious threat to our neighborhood, she began, an individual who has chosen to isolate himself behind steel, who refuses to comply with basic requests for cooperation. This behavior is not only divisive but dangerous. She held up a printed photo of my gate like it was evidence in a court case. This is not in the spirit of Sunnyvale Grove. I raised my hand. You mean the gate that keeps you off my lawn? That got a few chuckles from the back. Karen's eyes narrowed. The gate that makes it impossible for neighbors to access necessary paths, you mean my driveway? More laughter. Even some of her usual yes-men started shifting in their seats. But Karen pushed on, her voice rising, hands trembling with righteous fury. There was a time when we shared things in this community. We trusted each other. Now we have residents building barriers and calling the police when someone walks near their yard. That was my cue. Or drives over their flowers. Or parks in their spot. Or calls 911 because they can't illegally use someone else's driveway in the middle of the night. She turned bright red. That was an emergency. Yeah, someone muttered from the crowd, an emergency parking tantrum. And just like that, the room turned. People started whispering, shaking their heads. A few even clapped. Karen stood frozen, her authority crumbling beneath her pumps. After the meeting, the real fallout began. She started trying to weaponize the HOA bylaws against me in every conceivable way. I got 3 violation notices in 1 week. 1 for improper mailbox placement, even though it had been there for 5 years, 1 for non-uniform grass height, and 1 for unauthorized security equipment because apparently the trail cam mounted to a tree near my property line was intrusive. I responded to each one with detailed legal responses, attached photos, and in one case, a literal quote from the HOA handbook that proved my grass was more compliant than hers. When she tried to fine me $250 for the camera, I responded by emailing every homeowner in the neighborhood a copy of the HOA financials courtesy of the sunshine laws that required public disclosure. That's when I noticed a few odd line items. Community beautification project funds going missing. HOA travel expenses listed for meetings that had never happened. Karen hadn't just overstepped, she'd been dipping into the communal funds like it was her own personal shopping spree. I didn't say anything yet. I kept digging. Meanwhile, Karen kept trying to win her war with paperwork and noise. She showed up at City Hall twice to try to report my gate. The city planner called me after the second visit. We have it on file, man. She needs to stop. Honestly, she's getting on our nerves now. Then came the smear campaign. She created a fake Facebook profile named Concerned Neighbor 84 and started commenting on neighborhood posts with gems like, gated residents divide communities and certain homeowners think they're better than the rest of us. Her mistake? Using her same writing style and not changing her vocabulary. People caught on fast. Screenshots circulated. One neighbor commented, "Karen, you do know we can all tell it's you, right?" Karen went quiet online. But her in-person antics were ramping up. She started sitting in her SUV outside my house during the day. Just sitting there, sometimes with binoculars. I called the police again. They showed up, recognized her, and gave her a very firm, "Ma'am, you need to go home." She played the victim. "I'm being targeted. This is discrimination." No, the officer said this is harassment. That interaction became neighborhood gossip gold. I barely had to lift a finger anymore. Karen was doing all the damage herself. But the real kicker came a week later. I got home from work and found a flyer taped to my front door. Urgent, petition for special HOA session to discuss new leadership. It wasn't from me. It wasn't even from someone I knew personally. It was from a group of fed-up neighbors who were done with Karen's reign. I read it, smiled, and added my name. The countdown had begun. Karen didn't know it yet, but her days at the top were numbered. All her tantrums, her fake reports, her surveillance drives, they had backfired. And in trying to make me the villain, she had turned the entire neighborhood against herself. The woman who once called herself the face of community spirit was now the punchline to every group chat. And the best part? I hadn't even revealed what I'd found in the HOA financial reports. That bombshell was coming. Soon. I wish I could say that Karen's meltdown at the HOA meeting, followed by weeks of public humiliation and failed attempts to weaponize the HOA bylaws, finally pushed her into submission. But you know better than that. Karen didn't retreat. She unraveled. It began subtly at first, missing newsletters, forgotten yard inspections, long-winded Facebook rants that barely made sense. Her grip on the neighborhood was slipping, and she knew it. The board, once a collection of spineless yes-men, was beginning to distance themselves. And every day the gate stood tall at the mouth of my driveway, it was another reminder to her and everyone else that her authority had limits. She hated it. She couldn't stand the idea that someone told her no, and it stuck. But instead of backing down gracefully, she did what only a true HOA dictator on the brink would do. She exploded. And that explosion came on a cold Thursday morning at exactly 3:02 a.m. I woke up to the sound of loud knocking, no, not knocking, pounding on my front door. A mix of banging and shouting, a woman's voice muffled but unmistakably furious. I rolled over, bleary-eyed, checked the time, and felt the dread settle in my chest like wet concrete. No sane person knocks on doors at 3 a.m. And the moment I pulled up the security camera feed on my phone, I saw her, Karen, pacing like a rabid raccoon on the other side of the gate, still dressed in her ridiculous pink robe and matching fuzzy slippers. She was yelling into her phone with one hand, the other waving furiously in the air. And then I heard it. Sirens. Not distant, not fading in, but full-blown, racing down the street, lights blazing, emergency sirens. My stomach sank. I switched views on the app and saw a squad car pull up, followed by another. 2 police vehicles, lights swirling red and blue, tires screeching as they came to a halt right in front of my house. I threw on a hoodie and stepped outside onto the porch, just in time to hear Karen wailing like she'd just been locked out of Buckingham Palace. "I can't get to my parking space," she shrieked. "He's blocking me in. It's a crisis." One of the officers looked at her like she was speaking in Martian. "Ma'am, are you in danger?" "Yes. I'm in danger of walking farther than I should have, T.O., she screamed, pointing at the gate like it was a crime scene. "This man has been preventing me from parking where I've always parked." "On his private property?" the other officer asked, voice flat. "Well, yes, but for years I've listened. I'm the HOA president. I have certain rights." "Is this an emergency?" "Yes. I can't get into my usual parking space, and I have a bad hip, and if I park on the street and have to walk that far, I could die." "Do you have a medical condition?" "No, but I could develop one under this kind of stress." I didn't say a word. I just stood on my porch, arms crossed, watching this absurd circus unfold under a moonlit sky. One of the officers turned toward me. "Sir, can we ask you a few questions?" I nodded, met them at the gate, and punched in the code to let them in. Karen tried to slip through behind them, but one of the cops physically stopped her with an arm. "Please stay where you are, ma'am." "But I stay." She shrank back with an offended gasp. Once inside, I calmly explained everything again. I showed them the survey, the property deed, the emails from City Hall, the prior police reports, and even the footage from earlier that night of Karen pacing outside the gate for 10 minutes before she made the 911 call. One of the officers whistled low and muttered to the other, "We've got another one." Then they turned to her. "Ma'am," the taller one said, "you're being charged with filing a false police report and misuse of emergency services." "What?" she gasped. "No, you can't. This is my neighborhood." "That may be," the officer said, "but that man owns that property and there's no emergency here." "This is political," she screamed. "You don't understand. If you arrest me, this whole community will fall apart." "Ma'am, please place your hands behind your back." "No. This is harassment. I'm the victim here. I demand to speak to the chief." "The chief is asleep like the rest of the world at 3 o'clock in the morning." "You're making a mistake." "You've already made several," he replied. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the torn flower beds, the countless fines she issued to neighbors for things like overly decorative mailbox flags, the time she made Old Man Hell remove his wind chimes for being audibly aggressive, and that smug look she wore every time she parked in my driveway like it was a reserved spot. So no, I didn't feel bad. Not even a little. Karen was placed in the back of the squad car. The neighborhood was now fully awake. Porch lights blinked on, neighbors peeked out windows and doors, some came outside in robes and pajamas. Phones were out. Cameras were rolling. Karen was screaming like a banshee about rights and reputations and HOA bylaws no one ever read. Then she was gone, driven off into the night like a cautionary tale. The street fell quiet, the drama receding like a storm. I stood there for a moment, absorbing it all, then turned back inside. By 8 a.m., the footage was everywhere. Someone had uploaded a video of her arrest to the neighborhood group chat. It was less than 10 seconds, grainy but unmistakable. "You can't do this, I am the HOA," she cried, right before the officer shut the door. The comments were brutal. "Guess you're not anymore." She finally snapped. Anyone else want to elect a new president before she starts a war with the garbage trucks? But the damage didn't stop at embarrassment. The police filed a report that morning recommending charges. And that triggered a domino effect I hadn't even planned for. One of the board members, Meg, the same one who had followed Karen around like a lapdog for years, resigned. Publicly. With a post that read, "I no longer feel comfortable supporting leadership that behaves like a petty tyrant. We need change." The HOA treasurer followed hours later, citing concerns over pending financial irregularities. That last part? I had a feeling it was just the beginning. And I was right. The emergency vote petition that had been circulating quietly for weeks suddenly exploded. The minimum number of signatures to call for a full leadership review? Met. Then doubled. Then tripled. People who had been silent were now energized. Residents who were too scared to say anything before, those who'd been fined, threatened, silenced, were now marching into the community center, demanding a new election. Karen tried to respond from the shadows. She sent an email claiming she was on a temporary wellness retreat and that her arrest was blown out of proportion. The HOA board ignored her. Then they froze her access to the group email list. She lost her administrative rights to the website. Her nameplate was removed from the community bulletin board. It was like watching a statue get chiseled down into rubble. Still, I stayed quiet. I wasn't the face of the movement. I didn't want to be. But I had something in my pocket that was going to end this once and for all. And I was saving it for the final vote. You see, I had reviewed every line of the HOA's financials and what I found was worse than expected. But I wasn't going to drop the bomb yet. Not until every last person saw, clearly, who Karen really was. First, she had to watch everything she built come tumbling down. And the best part? She lit the fuse herself the moment she picked up her phone and called 911 because she couldn't park in someone else's driveway. That's the thing about Karen, she was so used to people backing down, so obsessed with power, that she didn't see the moment she became a parody of herself. But now the mask had fallen. The cracks were visible. And I wasn't the only one watching. The entire neighborhood was. And they were ready. The fall of an empire doesn't always happen with a bang. Sometimes it starts with a whisper. A slow, creeping unraveling that begins behind closed doors and ends with someone standing alone, stunned, as the world they built comes crashing down. That was exactly how it went for Karen. But unlike most dictators, she had the unique privilege of lighting her own match. The days after her 3 a.m. arrest were some of the quietest I'd ever experienced in our neighborhood. Not because there was peace, but because everyone was watching and waiting. Watching the HOA board scramble to maintain some illusion of authority without its queen bee. Watching neighbors gather in groups at the park benches and dog trails, sharing their Karen horror stories like war veterans. And most importantly, waiting for the emergency HOA meeting scheduled for Saturday afternoon. The vote? The reckoning. The final moment where it would all come to a head. Now, I had stayed relatively behind the scenes through most of this. Sure, I was the one who built the gate, who said no to her demands, who pushed back when no one else would, but I hadn't once asked anyone to vote against her. I hadn't led a rally or posted in the group chat. I didn't need to. Karen had burned herself down beautifully. But I had one final card left to play. Something no one else had seen yet. Something that would ensure this wasn't just a vote of no confidence, it would be a full-blown excommunication. And the best part? It was all perfectly legal. I walked into the meeting that Saturday carrying a manila folder thicker than a Sunday newspaper. The room was packed. More people than I'd ever seen at an HOA meeting. They'd pulled out folding chairs, set up fans, and people were even standing along the back wall, arms crossed, waiting to witness the fall. Karen was there too, of course. She ditched the pink robe for a crisp white pantsuit, her hair tightly curled and her makeup freshly applied, as if she could cover up her crumbling reign with a touch-up. She sat at the front table, clutching her binder like it was a life vest. When I walked in, she gave me a tight, insincere smile. "Jake," she said, "glad you could finally be involved in community leadership." I returned her smile. Wouldn't miss it. The board called the meeting to order. They tried to keep it civil. Today's agenda is focused solely on leadership review and concerns voiced by residents. But civility went out the window fast. The moment they opened the floor for comments, the room exploded. She fined me $300 for leaving my trash cans out for one night. She banned my daughter's lemonade stand because it clashed with the neighborhood aesthetic. She walked into my backyard twice because she didn't like the wind chimes I hung. It went on like that for 15 minutes. A floodgate of frustration that had been held back for years. Karen's face twisted with every new complaint. She tried to respond, interject, explain, but the board told her to stay silent until the vote. And then, right as things began to simmer down, I stepped forward. "If I may," I said, "I have something I'd like to share." Karen's eyes narrowed. "This should be reserved for registered agenda topics." "It is," I said calmly, holding up the folder. "Community financial concerns." That shut her up. I walked to the front, handed a stack of printed reports to each board member, and turned to face the crowd. "For the past 2 months, I've been reviewing the HOA's financial records. What I found is enlightening." I clicked my laptop, connected to the projector, and brought up a chart. In the last 3 years, nearly $17,000 in HOA funds were labeled under community improvements. But there's no record of what those projects were. A murmur went through the crowd. $200 went toward a leadership development retreat. But when I called the hotel listed on the receipt, they had only one guest that weekend, Karen Witherspoon. Her room service bill was $317. HOA funds. Karen's mouth dropped open. "That's slander." "No," I interrupted, "it's a receipt." I flipped to the scanned copy on the screen. "Here's the signature." "This is completely out of context," she barked. "Context like the $600 spent on monogrammed HOA notebooks?" I asked. "Or the monthly payments to a company called Brightbreeze Consulting, which turns out to be Karen's cousin's business, a business that does not exist outside of this invoice?" The board members turned pale. One actually slid his chair back from the table. "We had no knowledge of this," the treasurer said. "But I do," I continued. "I compiled everything, cross-checked the HOA charter, and spoke with a real estate attorney. And I can tell you definitively, these are not just financial irregularities. They are violations of state nonprofit law. Fraud, embezzlement, conflict of interest. All of which can be prosecuted." The room went dead silent. Karen looked like a statue, frozen, red-faced, and cornered. "You're lying," she whispered. "I kept records. I followed procedure. You're twisting everything." I turned to the board. "Would anyone like to motion for a formal audit and removal of current leadership?" The secretary raised her hand instantly. Motion made. The treasurer followed. Seconded. The president, who had once been Karen's most loyal supporter, nodded. "All in favor?" Every hand in the room went up. Every single one. Karen sat down slowly, her body folding in on itself, hands trembling as she clutched her binder like it could shield her from the truth. The vote was unanimous. She was officially removed as HOA president pending investigation. The board promised full transparency, and a committee was formed to transition leadership. But Karen? She didn't wait for the transition. The next morning, a moving truck appeared in front of her house. No notice. No farewells. She packed in silence while neighbors watched from across the street. Some waved. Most didn't. She didn't return a single look. Just got in her SUV and drove away, tail tucked, power gone. The house went up for sale within a week. Listed well below market value. And the gate? Still standing tall. Strong. Unbothered. A monument to boundaries kept and battles won. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood felt lighter. No one got fined for watering their lawn too late. Kids could ride bikes without fear of citation. People painted their mailboxes fun colors. One guy even installed a porch swing. "That would have given Karen a stroke," he joked. And the best part? At the next HOA meeting, someone nominated me to take over as president. I declined. "I'm good behind the gate," I said. But I did offer to review future budgets just in case. These days, the lavender in my garden is blooming again. The grass has grown back where her tires once tore through. The keypad at the gate has a new entry label for deliveries and friends. But for everyone else? That gate stays closed. Karen learned the hard way. And now the whole neighborhood remembers. Because some people build fences to keep others out. Me? I built a gate to keep one person from ever thinking she owned what never belonged to her in the first place.